This is Tim.
And this is Adam.
And this is Critiquing Comics. Welcome to Critiquing Comics. This is Tim in Tokyo with Adam in Nagoya. How are you?
I'm all right. I'm preparing for a big business trip to the United States, which is my first trip abroad for probably 2 years, so I'm a little bit nervous.
Yeah, it's getting like a year and it's been 2 years and a half for me now since I was last there.
Yeah, it's weird. It's kind of like Urashima Taro when you go back. It's like everything is changed without you, and you're like this,
yeah,
walking through the ghost of your life.
Yeah, Urashima Taro is the Japanese equivalent of Rip Van Winkle, for listeners who may not know. But yeah. Urashima Taro went under the sea, right? Mm-hmm. And then when he came back out, much more time had passed than he thought or something. I don't remember the story exactly.
So he was given like a present from the Sea Queen or whatever, and they told him not to open it. And then when he opened it, he turned into an old man, and it was really weird. Like
that's right.
Typical like classic Japanese fairy tales where they don't have any. It's not a happy ending, and it's not really even like. It's just kind of a pointless ending in a way. Like, what was I supposed to take away? There's no, like, morals of a lot of those stories, I think, so.
Well, heed warnings, I guess, is the meaning of it. So if you don't want me to open this box, why are you giving it to me?
Yeah, exactly. I guess it's sort of the forbidden fruit in the garden in a way, but...
Yeah.
But, like, it was confusing to me because the turtle, he saves a turtle from these kids on the beach, so it's... he's being rewarded by being taken down to the bottom of the sea and all this kind of stuff. And then it seems more like a punishment in the end. Like he hadn't really done anything bad and his whole life is just wasted away. So anyway.
Yeah. Okay. So comic.
This has been critiquing Japanese folklore.
Right. Yeah, well, I don't think the authors of the Japanese folklore are listening to this podcast. They've been gone for a while.
They're missing out.
The comic we're talking about is called Root and Branch, created by a woman who goes by the name Pink Pitcher. And she emailed us because she's running a Kickstarter for book 5 of the comic until October 14th. But I thought, why should I start with book 5? Because I don't know this comic at all. So I went back to the beginning, and I thought, well, I'll read some of this, and if it's not interesting, I'll jump ahead or something. And I read 200 pages.
Wow.
It does read quickly. There's not a lot of text. It's not like 1960 Spider-Man comics or something. It's not all that many words on a page.
That's true, actually. And maybe I'm jumping the gun a bit, but the way that they put the words on the page itself is, I think, very well thought out and deliberate. So, But we can get to that later.
Okay. So the comic is about a young elf woman named Ariana. Although it looks like, now 6-7 years on, looks like in the recent pages she looks older, but so maybe this comic is following her whole adult life or something. But at the beginning, she's like setting out to kind of see the world, and she ends up among some humans, and apparently it's not quite explained, but I guess that the humans and the elves are sort of aware of each other's existence, but don't really spend much time around each other. And they're both like surprised to see each other. Like an American kid meeting a Japanese kid. Like, wow. Somebody from another part of the world. And, they can't understand each other. They speak different languages.
Yeah, I thought, in the beginning when she sets off on her adventure, I thought, oh, it's a really I don't know, kind of a novel take on the fantasy concept, because it's, you know, an elf who says, oh, I've heard that humans exist, but I never really knew, you know, so it's kind of like the fantasy through the elf's perspective. But after that, it very quickly becomes a very kind of, I don't know, I don't want to say typical, but it, you know, it follows the general flow of a fantasy story after that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I should mention, so this elf woman, she does have pointed ears, but she's not particularly short. She's like normal human height.
Oh, yeah.
So, yeah, it's like she's not like one of the 7 dwarves or something.
Well, so there's a total dork from my high school who would have given you an earful about how elves are actually taller than humans, and I remember being berated by this guy a lot in high school about how elves are not actually small. So, and he gave me this whole lecture about the difference between high fantasy and low fantasy, which I don't really remember, but I think that this probably falls in the category of low fantasy because it doesn't have like dragons and things like that. But I really don't know. I mean, I'll be honest, Tim, I think I've told you before, but fantasy is definitely not my thing.
Yeah, same here.
Yeah, I generally steer clear of it, and this one in particular has a total fantasy look to it too, the art and even the like text and stuff like that. So, at first I thought I wasn't going to get through even 30 pages, but you know, I read the first book, which is probably 120 pages or so, and then I skipped over to book 5. So, I would say that I enjoyed it for what it is, despite it being fantasy. is probably how I would put it.
Probably the most interesting comic I've read that talks about elves and fairies.
Yeah.
Because usually I'm not up for that stuff. But I mean, this doesn't hit you over the head with it. It's kind of a understated fantasy, you know, in that, like you said, there aren't any dragons, and it's not like full on like Dungeons and Dragons type of thing.
Right. Yeah, they're not wearing pointy hats and stuff, and
and learning spells, and
right.
So in the first chapter, is about her first encounter with humans, and I guess these guys are lumberjacks because they're cutting down trees, and of course she's big on nature, and she doesn't really like them cutting all the trees down.
Right.
And she starts to learn their language. Of course, it's presented as English. I'm sure it's not actually English. So she becomes able to kind of haltingly communicate in the humans' language. At least those humans, because then late in chapter 2, she goes further and she meets different people who she can hardly understand, because we don't quite see it, because it just looks like normal English to the reader, but they must be speaking like a different dialect of the language or something.
Could be. Yeah. This was an interesting, for me, that idea of her as the main character having to learn this language and communicate in it. And I thought, okay, well, as the book goes on, she's going to get better and better. But I skipped ahead to like page 600 and she's still speaking in broken English that far along. So I mean, hats off to them for the commitment to the premise, but it must be tiring if you read the whole 600 pages with her kind of speaking in broken English. I don't know, maybe not. I didn't read all 600, so I can't say.
So you said you read book 1 and book 5?
I read book 1 and I read part of book 5. I wanted to see how the artist has developed from the first book to the last one, just because, like you said, there's probably 6 years in between. So that was what I was curious about.
Yeah, 2015 to this year. And I looked at the last few pages of book 5 and like, wow, has her art improved?
Yeah, definitely.
In terms of like the perspective and just the figures and the coloring, and it just really looks more professional than it did in 2015.
Yeah, that's the main reason that I wanted to jump ahead, was just to see how she'd progressed as an artist. And the writing, it seems a bit more, what do I want to say? I guess she has more of her own voice and not just like it definitely has a style to it that is sort of unique in book 5, whereas book 1 seems, a bit sophomoric maybe, as far as the actual writing goes.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, you do keep working on a comic for 6 or 7 years, 2 or 3 times a week, you're going to get better. And she certainly has. Right. I was kind of shocked reading book 2 because, the first book seems kind of serene. And then in the second book, she ends up killing some highwaymen.
Okay.
She gets in a big fight with them, and they injure her, and she gets better and then comes back and wipes them out. And she seems to see it as kind of a natural pruning of like removing the bad thing from what's good. But still, I mean, I was kind of taken aback by it because I wasn't expecting it to go that direction. And it kind of, makes her a little bit, I don't know, you could say makes her a less sympathetic character, although it's not like she's like, hey, I'm a killer now. It's just that she, her philosophy is very different from the humans' philosophy, I guess. And she just sees it as a way of kind of maintaining what's good. But yeah, it was kind of shocking.
That almost makes it more frightening, though, right? Because she's doing it in cold blood, like it's it's a remorseless kind of killing. Like, oh, this is the natural order of things. Almost I don't know, almost like a eugenics kind of thing or something.
Yeah.
But yeah, that surprises me to hear that. I didn't read book 2, but in book 1, she's brought up as this. I mean, she's introduced as kind of a healer. They want to keep her there to kind of heal all the people, and so she seems like kind of that wide-eyed, innocent character who's just out there to try to help everybody. So it's interesting that you say that, that she takes a turn and ends up killing these highwaymen. Are these, now I want to ask you, are those people connected to who's been robbing the wagons that bring supplies back and forth between the towns?
Yeah, I think that it was those guys. Yeah, there was a problem with the wagons in the first chapter.
Yeah, that makes some more sense then, because, you realize that in the first chapter that these wagons that bring supplies to these little distant, towns, are kind of the lifeblood of these people, and they're about to starve to death. So, and the breakdown of that supply chain seems to be threatening everybody, from what I gathered from book 1. So, if she's doing that in a sense to preserve the whole balance altogether of everybody, then maybe there's a little bit more. I don't know. It's more in keeping with her characters, I suppose.
Yeah.
Can I give a little bit of talk about?
Oh,
the
yeah,
artwork,
you wanted to talk about the placement of the words also.
Yeah. So the placement of the words is, I think, at times it works really well, and at other times it doesn't. It was one of my pet peeves, and also one of the things that I appreciated about it is, the word bubbles the word balloons are placed in a way that it's really easy to read. There's always a smooth flow. In general, where to go next with your eyes and all that stuff. So the page is set up in a good way, but there are times where it seems to me that there's a lot of dead space around the bubbles, the word balloons, because they've set that space out.
Yeah, there were some pages where I did get a little confused because there's like a back and forth between two characters, and the balloons were so far apart that I started just reading down, like, oh, wait, I'm supposed to be jumping over to the right for this balloon and then back to the left. But did you notice reading book 5? Has she improved on that?
Actually, no. Well, with the problem that I was talking about with the dead space that occurs in panels and stuff, that has not really improved in book 5. Like one of the earlier pages on, it's a lack of balance where they're focusing, like the page, your eyes focus on this part that you don't necessarily want your eyes being drawn towards. I think with the part that I'm talking about in book 5, it was like a road that just kind of goes off, but there's other action happening on the page. And there are other pages I can think of where, for example, the characters seem to be pushed off to the side almost, where they're almost bleeding off of the page. And then there's a whole bunch of dead space in the middle where the word balloons are supposed to go. And so it almost seems like they're prioritizing the word balloons and sacrificing the art in a sense, or there's definitely a kind of apprehension about covering things with the balloons. So I can see that the artist doesn't ever want like a person's body or face or something covered up in any way by a balloon.
So she's overcompensating?
Yeah, in a sense, right. Yeah, I think you're right, actually, because there's instead there will be like nothing there in the background. And I can totally understand that, because I've definitely drawn out a page before, and then I thought, oh, I've got to erase that artwork that I put time and effort into by covering it with balloons. I've felt that experience before, so I think maybe in this case it's almost an overcautiousness to avoid doing that and leaving plenty of space for the balloons to go. But yeah, I would say that my critique about the art overall has to do with that sense of balance. There are some pages where the balance is really, really nice. I can think a good example is on page 70, if anybody wants to go and look through it. There's really good symmetry on the page, both like horizontal and vertical symmetry, and then there's a nice kind of balance of colors as well, with the green and the yellows in the grass and stuff like that. And there are some pages where there's a really good balance, and there are other pages where I feel like the balance is not there at all. And there are other cases where I feel like, for example, there isn't a good balance between medium shots, long shots, and close-up shots. There seems to be a whole lot of these full body shots, and then occasionally a couple shots of heads talking, but for the most part, there isn't much of a back and forth between those different type of shots depending on what type of scene is being told, which I think if you're used to reading comics, that leaves you with a certain kind of uneasiness, because you want it to have, you know, a certain type of scenes focus in close and other ones, you know, draw back. So that idea of the balance and the use of space, I feel like was lacking in book 1. And I do feel like that has improved in book 5. Like the overall balance has improved a bit more. But even so, I would still say, you know, I'd like to see some more variation in the shots. Like, for example, when two people are talking, almost like you would see on a TV show where one person is right up in the foreground and they're almost blurred out, and the other person is sort of, I guess not even the foreground, like somebody is really, really up forward and then somebody else is sort of in the foreground, you know? So I don't know, these kind of shots where you're kind of playing off of like dialogue shots versus like action shots versus establishing shots and stuff like that, I don't see a good enough balance of that personally.
I see.
I actually wrote, this is one of the first books that I can think of that we've reviewed where I wrote a lot of notes about the art, just things that kind of jumped out at me. So, what I was just talking about was on page 17 with the two characters kind of bleeding off of the page, and then a bunch of dead space right around the word bubbles, if people care to go and look that up. So, like I said, there are cases where the pages really pull this off. They have a good balance and stuff like that, but there are other times where I don't feel that's the case. And I guess I keep coming back to this word balance, but it's even with the composition of bodies and stuff like that. There are times where the head doesn't seem to quite fit with the shoulders, and there's other times where it looks great, you know. So I don't know, the whole overall sense of balancing these different objects seems like in the earlier books it was somebody kind of figuring out how to draw those things, and now I feel like in book 5, you know, she's really figured out more of how she wants everything to look.
Okay.
I think it was page 17. There's a shot in the middle where the two characters are kind of standing on either side of the word balloons, which is a shot that she tends to use a lot, but this one in particular caught my attention as feeling like it was prioritizing the words over the composition.
Well, I see on page 16 there's a panel where there are guys sitting at a table, and then in between them there's another panel with the speaker's face in it. He's kind of speaking there in between them. But I don't quite see what you're talking about on 17.
Okay, I may have written down the wrong number. I'm not sure, but
okay.
Yeah. Actually, when you talk about the tables, that reminds me also, there was a few times where I saw kind of weird tangents that definitely throw your eye off. It's almost distracting in a sense. There's one page for sure where they're drawing, it's a scene of people eating in a kind of a tavern or whatever it is. And every panel has a different angle that the table is being shown at. So the table plane is going off in different directions in each panel, and that's actually conflicting with the panel borders, which are also not straight. They're kind of at their own angles. And so it creates tangents all over the page, and I kept feeling like my eye was just being drawn all over the place. And I think that occurs as well on page 62. There's an establishing shot of a kind of a cottage in this mountain scene, and the angle that the roofs and stuff are drawn at also draws kind of a weird tangent. So that's another thing that was, I feel like maybe perhaps a beginner's mistake, and I don't think that she's likely to be making those later on in the book.
Yeah. One other thing I did want to say about the writing. So, that first chapter, I was thinking about like who this comic is for. That first chapter, I was almost in the family-friendly realm. There is one page where Ariana's nude, which some people might not be comfortable letting their kids see, but there's no violence really, and I don't think there was much in the way of swearing. But then in chapter 2, you've got the killing and you've got the nasty words, and she's nude again. And so I was like, okay, I'm not sure that this chapter's for the same audience that chapter 1 was for.
That's interesting you bring that up, because I thought that nude scene also, it seemed so innocent. It was completely non-sexual, other than the fact that the man in the scene was a little bit embarrassed about it. But she seems to be not understanding at all what's wrong with being naked. So
yeah, right. It's not a sex scene at all. It's just it's natural for me to not want to wear any clothes type of situation, because she's an elf and she's kind of really in tune with nature, and so she doesn't like to wear clothes if she doesn't have to. Right, yeah. And in book 5, there's definitely a lot more nudity than there is in book 1. But yeah, even in that case, it's never like you said, it's not a sexual thing. It's more just her, being comfortable being naked in nature. So, I'm sorry to go back just a second. I realized that I was telling you the wrong pages. The pages where the text is unbalanced. You can cut this in later if you need to. But page 83 is one example, and page 105 is another example where there's just a lot of dead space with around the text bubbles. Page 17 was another thing. So, okay. But yeah, page 83 is a good example of, I think, what I was talking about with the... yeah, I see it. Yeah. Kind of a sparse background and just these word balloons there in the middle, and then characters are kind of pushed off into the leftover space. And actually, while we're on page 83, this is kind of a pet peeve of mine, but they use the word gift here as a verb. Yeah, that's very modern. It's very modern. It doesn't seem to fit in this fantasy context. Right. Well, of course, maybe that's because we're old and we remember when people didn't use gift as a verb. And I think the artist is considerably younger than us, and she maybe didn't live in that world. So that's interesting to think about that. People who grew up in a world where gifted was always a... Yeah, gift was always a noun. A verb. Yeah. And I still refuse to use it as a verb just because I'm an old man and I'm not used to it. But yeah, I agree. I'm the same. I mean, I tend to take pride in my 1980s English. almost in its pristine state after living in Japan for 32 years.
You've pickled it. You've got that perfect preserved 1980s English then.
Radical, man. Anyway. But overall, from what I read of this, it's a pretty engaging comic. It's also interesting to see her improve over the years. But, despite the flaws early on, I still, I kept going on it. I didn't say, oh boy, I'm sick of this, I'll just jump ahead. I was still interested in what was happening. So, yeah, and
this is not really, I guess, not necessarily germane to the story itself, but did you notice that this is part of the Spider Forest, I think it's called Spider Forest, Web Comics Collective?
Oh, I saw that in the corner and it didn't register, but now that you mention it, I've heard of that.
I think when we reviewed Owl.
Oh yeah, the Owl comic, that was part of
Owls
this too. Yeah.
Yeah, the Realm of Owls was part of this same group. So yeah, I felt like Realm of Owls read better on my phone than this did. This feels like it was made for print more than Realm of Owls, which was made with web in mind. And actually, the fact that this is made for print, I want to talk for a second about how labor-intensive this must have been to make it, because it's very clearly done with traditional tools. It looks like it's maybe Copic markers. At first, I thought it was watercolor, but looking more closely, there's not much bleed over, so they're either a really precise watercolorist or it's Copic markers sort of made to keep those bleeds and blends there. But like when I look at some of those backgrounds, especially a lot of them in the first book have like this kind of red earth with these green sprouting plants here and there and stuff. It would have taken forever, some of those. And in book 5, the backgrounds get way more detailed. And so this project, for sure, I mean, 600 pages is a lot, even if it was drawn with stick figures. But some of these, some of these have a lot of detail and, I think a lot of love put into them. So that's something that I definitely want to compliment the artist about. And, like you said, the color work gets really good around book 5. They've got a lot more variation. I found myself thinking in the first book, because the palette is generally the same for the whole book almost, I thought, if this is Copic, she must be buying the same markers or refills again and again, because she must be running out of these greens and the flesh tones, and it's kind of that same muted palette for the whole 120 pages. So I thought, man, she must be running out of markers all the time for some of this. But yeah, the color work becomes a lot more varied, and the mood, it changes along with the mood and things like that in later volumes.
I'm just looking at the Spider Forest site. There are a lot of different comics here. It's a comics collective site.
Yeah, I think they have over 100 maybe.
Looks like it. Yeah.
Yeah.
So that is Root and Branch, and I'll link to the web comic and to the Kickstarter, since that'll still be going on when this comes out. So take a look and support it if you want to. Anything going on with you, Adam, before we wrap it up?
Yes, actually, interesting that you ask. I don't know if this will air in time, but on September the 18th, probably won't catch it in time, but on September the 18th,
this is actually going to come out on the 18th, but
okay, well, if I catch you in time, if you guys catch this in time, Comic Art Tokyo is kind of collaborating with the Philippine International Comic Online Festival, PCOF, and we will be doing a book talk about actually a book that you and I reviewed, Tim, the Minamata book.
Oh, yeah.
So the creators, Sean and Akiko, will be coming on with me, and we'll be doing a live discussion of their book and some of their other projects together for that festival. So if anybody is interested, that's a really cool festival. They have, creators from all over the world. I think Singapore and Australia and France and all kinds of places, Poland, coming on to discuss, different topics related to comic books. So,
okay, cool. All right. So, listeners, if you would like us to critique your comics, send a PDF or a link to mail@deconstructingcomics.com, and we'll read 30 pages or 200 pages or something, and then we'll talk about it on the show. So, thanks for listening, and thank you, Adam.
Thanks, Tim.
No critique next week, but we'll be back in 2 weeks with the latest from Rochelle Meyer. See you then.